succession continues on. The royal succession, Estolian traditions, promises we revere, contentment instead of fear.
(1976), Southern California. The instruction of women, instituted by Ria, was perhaps one of the most profound innovations in Estolian education since Amador established the Acolyte and Elder programs. One of the issues Ria's apprentices debated was the role of women in the nation. To an outsider, Estolia seemed like a prime example of the inequality of the sexes. But the older women who were Kaylee for 10 or more years would argue that it was actually more backwards for men. They could only marry at the age of 30, had to yield up their souls, and if they lost their Kaylee, they would die. Emerald Amador, Master's Essay.
Wraith!
Her sister hollered to her from downstairs. Wraith sighed heavily and bent down to kiss the forehead of her doll. She tucked the blanket more securely around the doll's chin, and then moved towards the door just as her sister, in a voice not to be ignored, called her name again.
Wraith!
Coming!
She cried out. Willow was going through the mail. Their father was out of town for the next 2 weeks, and until he returned, Willow, at the age of 18, was the boss.
Come down here right now!
Willow demanded once she saw her sister descending the stairs. Wraith rolled her eyes to the ceiling. If only her father had allowed her to stay with Alyssa Perkins or Faye Lowry instead of remaining at the house with her sister. She was 10 years old, after all, plenty old enough to stay with friends. Whatever had upset her sister clearly needed to be dealt with. Wraith skipped down the last of the stairs and then settled into the chair her sister was pointing at.
Do you know what this is?
Willow waved the paper vigorously towards her.
Did you win Publishing Clearinghouse?
Wraith asked, trying to keep the smirk out of her voice.
Stupid. It's called Publishers Clearinghouse.
Willow was scathing. She slapped the paper on the table and said,
This is your progress report.
Wraith looked at the yellow paper, wondering why her sister was all worked up.
So?
She prompted her sister. Willow crossed her arms and glared at her for several minutes before changing the subject.
What were you doing when I got home?
Playing with my dolls.
Wraith said.
Mrs. Parks says that all you do is daydream. About your dolls?
Willow said.
She added a note to say that you're always dreaming about the future, and she's not sure it's healthy.
I thought having a good imagination was an asset.
Wraith said.
Asset.
Her sister corrected.
And there are limits to everything. Your teacher suggested that we ask you about your daydreams.
What do you want to know?
What do you dream about?
Willow asked. Her voice softened. Wraith was happy to share her dreams with her sister.
Getting married.
She was prompt in her reply.
And having babies. Alyssa thinks that 4 kids are perfect, but I want 7 or 8.
For the next half hour, she and her sister had a pleasant conversation. She was able to share her dream future. Wraith told her that she would meet Mr. Right sometime after she turned 21, and would get married just after she turned 23, and she would be pregnant right away and have a baby before she turned 24.
What makes 23 such a perfect age?
Willow asked.
I want to be a young mother, not old like.
She broke off. Her mother, Willow's stepmother, was nearly 37 when Wraith was born and would not play with her or do things with her that other girls' mothers did. Wraith was barely 8 when her mother discovered she had breast cancer and decided to live with cancer rather than live with only one breast. It was almost a full year since she passed away.
So you want to be a young mother?
Willow said slowly.
But why not 22 or even 18?
Wraith did not think her sister would make a good mother, and she was 18.
23 is perfect.
She repeated, unwilling to explain her reasons.
Promises we revere, contentment instead of fear.
Later that day, Willow went up to Wraith's room to talk with her.
Gerald is coming over later tonight. Do you think you could stay in your room?
Wraith detested Gerald. The way he looked at her was creepy. It was easy to promise to stay in her bedroom. She awoke disoriented some time later, not sure what woke her up. She looked over at the window and saw that the moon was rising. She got up and left her room, intending to use the bathroom. It was dark in the hallway, but a light and noise were coming from her sister's room at the end of the hall. The door was partially open with a shaft of light shining on the banister rail. She was reaching for the bathroom doorknob when a moaning noise distracted her. Concerned, she walked to the end of the hallway, wondering what she would do if her sister was seriously ill. Once she got to the half-open door, she stared at the pimple-covered back of her sister's boyfriend. He was in bed with her sister and they were both moaning. It was only as some of the words her sister and Gerald were saying percolated through to her that she realized what she was seeing. She felt hot and knew her face would be brick red in embarrassment. She ran to the bathroom and stared at her expression in the mirror for several minutes before she returned to her bedroom. She felt sick to her stomach. The next morning, she was lying in bed when her sister came into the room. When Wraith asked about what she saw, Willow told her young sister how it felt to lose her virginity, telling her far more than Wraith wanted to hear. By the time Willow left for work, Wraith was feeling as if the dreams she had for the future were completely impossible. Willow told her that she had to do that if she ever wanted to have any babies. A week later their father was back from his travels, and Willow made a special dinner for his return meal. They were eating the meatloaf that was Willow's specialty, when she said baldly,
Dad, Roger proposed.
Roger?
Wraith was confused.
My boss?
Willow said.
He's just been offered a position at the university that will lead to tenure.
Where will you live?
Their father asked her. He looked peculiar. Willow shrugged.
Right now he's living with some of the other adjunct professors.
Wouldn't this house be perfect for the two of you?
Wraith gaped at her father. He was giving Willow their house.
What do you mean, Dad?
Willow asked.
Well, I've been offered an overseas position, but I couldn't bring Wraith. I thought you might stay here and keep your sister.
6 weeks later, Wraith watched her sister marry the tall, dark, and handsome Rogelio Aguirre. They made a beautiful couple. She liked him. He treated her much better than her sister's other boyfriends. When Wraith was 13, her sister's daughter, Angelica, was barely 6 months old, and Willow was divorced. She barely waited 3 days between her divorce and her second wedding. When her sister was the perfect age to marry, 23, Wraith was one of the bridesmaids for her sister's third wedding. She had 2 daughters that she left with a babysitter for the wedding and honeymoon. When Wraith graduated from high school and started to attend the local community college, her sister's third marriage was on the rocks. About the only blessing that Wraith could see in her sister's latest exploits was that she did not have a third child from her third marriage. For a year, Willow and her 2 daughters both moved back in with Wraith and their father. Willow found a new man and married him, moving with him to New Jersey. Shortly after they moved, 3 things happened in rapid succession. She graduated from community college, interviewed and got the job as assistant to an executive at the Jenner Corporation, and her father was killed in an airline disaster. Her father left her the house since Willow was now quite wealthy and had married into even more wealth. She felt empty on that first day she went to work. When she met her new boss, Yves Cormier, she was delighted to work with him. He learned about her personal tragedy and eased into the position of surrogate father for her, giving her the warmth and solace her father's empty house was incapable of providing.
The royal succession, Estolian traditions, promises we revere, contentment instead of fear. Parents, abdication, peace is inherent. The keeper's sons will rule the nation. The royal succession, Estolian traditions, promises we revere, contentment instead of fear. Parents, abdication.
When Zacharias made his promise to deity, He in turn received many promises from deity. While happiness in marriage was not one of those promises, history demonstrates that this is one of the axioms in our nation, that all of the sons and daughters of Zacharias, if they are willing to live up to his promise to deity, will experience a deep and abiding marital happiness that will transcend death. The darker side of this coin, taught to all acolytes, are the consequences for the sons of Zacharias unwilling to make this promise. Those who go on to marry outside the traditions of the faith often find a type of happiness. Those who spurn marriage entirely, who are still single on their 31st birthday, discover how immutable the laws are that govern all Estolians, both devout and estranged. No Estolian will find desire for or pleasure with any woman if they do not wed before they are 31. In return for this, deity will introduce each man to his Kaylee before time expires, if he is willing to be led by the spirit. Adio of marriage.
Wraith parked her car and sighed. It was time to begin another day in the dull grind towards oblivion. As she turned the car off, she had to admit that her job wasn't that bad. She did, after all, get to work with Eve. And working with him was anything but dull. The job was dull, but she wouldn't quit as long as she could work with him. She pulled down the sun visor and flipped open the mirror. She frowned at her reflection. Yesterday was her 24th birthday. When her half-sister, at barely 18, got married, Wraith decided that there was no way she would be like her sister. She wouldn't marry for money or looks or prestige. She was going to meet and marry the perfect man at the age of 23 for love and only love, and they would live happily ever after. She didn't expect to reach the age of 24 having never even been in a meaningful relationship. She knew she was passably pretty, or at least not ugly, and she had been on a few dates. But, when the men she went out with assumed she would have sex with them as a natural end to an evening, she became wary of invitations. The last date she had was with the younger brother of her sister's fifth husband. She had ended up walking home from that unpleasant evening. His scathing words as she walked away continued to echo around her head. "It's the 80s, Wraith. Why the hell are you saving your virginity?" For Wraith, having sex with a man was something to approach with care. She could still remember when her sister gave up her virginity. Willow had shared everything she hated about the experience with her impressionable 10-year-old half-sister. After her sister's confidences, the entire concept of sexual intimacy left her with a vague feeling of insecurity and fear. No man had ever inspired her to active wanting, she just could not overcome the memory of her sister's shared experience. The few times she went on dates, she was called frigid when she did not respond to her escort's kisses. And, she thought to herself, as she stared at her blue-green eyes in the mirror, perhaps they were right? Perhaps she was frigid. Her caramel hair and over-large eyes and two full lips were not to the tastes of many men. Her hair fell in thick abundance to just above her waist, straight as rain, and with about the same amount of character. Most days she twisted it into a knot at her nape and ignored it. Flipping the sun visor up, she got out of the car and looked up at the 14-story building. Jenner Corporation was her life now, she mused. 4 years she had been working there, and while she was very good at her job, so were 1,000 others. She had a sinking suspicion life was going to go downhill from this point onward. Walking towards the building, she tried to shake off the mood of introspection. What was making her restless? Could it be that she had just turned 24 and all her plans to marry at the perfect age of 23 were so much fairy dust? Or it could be the birth of her sister's third daughter on Wraith's birthday was making her restless, anxious to be a mother someday, too. Little Misty. Her sister's newest daughter. Birthdays and her sister's marital exploits always seemed to make her uncomfortable, especially because she had so little success in the romance department for herself. She opened the glass door into the lobby of the Jenner Corporation and donned the most important accessory she owned, her smile. She crossed the lobby and greeted the receptionist.
Hello, Jessica. Did you have a nice weekend?
Jessica's smile was brilliant.
It was lovely. Sam and I went to the doctor after work on Friday, and he confirmed I'm pregnant.
Wraith passed a few pleasantries and then moved over to the bank of elevators. One opened immediately when she pressed the up button and she stepped inside feeling marginally better. The elevator doors opened to the wide plush-carpeted hallway of the executive level. She walked briskly towards her office. As she turned the corner of the hall, she slowed down when she saw two of the executives standing outside her office door. Kenneth Hutton and Amanda Cole were speaking with Delilah Rand, the executive assistant to the CEO of Jenner Corporation. All three turned to her, wearing solemn expressions. Wraith opened her mouth to ask them what was going on, when Delilah, her tone gentle, said,
"Sorry to have to tell you this, Wraith, but I just got a phone call from Eve's wife, Larissa. He was driving to the office this morning when he had a heart attack. Honey, he's dead."
Eve was her boss and about 2 rungs below the CEO. She could barely comprehend the fact that he was gone, that he would never fill the office with his vibrant presence, and that she had an empty void in her heart and soul that would never be filled again. Kenneth Hutton said to her, his tone blunt,
"We had plans to reorganize within the next 3 months anyway, and Eve was going to be offered an early retirement bonus. Now that he's gone, we'll expedite the process."
His words percolated through her frozenness and she blurted out,
"I'm laid off?"
A sharp nod of his head was her answer.
"Probably, but we'll still need you this week and next. You'll have to clear Eves' calendar, shift his appointments to other executives. Marshall Jenner wants you to know that we'll be looking through our openings to see if we can find you an alternative placement within the company while you wrap up Eves' business. If we can't find you another position, at the end of 2 weeks we'll give you a generous severance package and, if possible, a lead on another job working for a similar corporation."
Delilah handed her a piece of paper.
"For this morning, honey. Follow the guidelines on this paper as to where to send all of Eves' appointments. Don't bother to reschedule anything until later. We'll give you a better list as soon as we can so you can start rescheduling appointments after lunch."
Oh, she fights the night with all her might against the cunning rise. She will rise. Deity's promises never forgotten, never denied. The royal succession, Estolian traditions, promises we revere, contentment instead of fear.
The decision to send young Estolian men away to the various European universities was inspired. Those who weren't suited to the Estolian way would discover it during his time away from Estolia. In addition, young men have the chance to exercise their libido and discover later in life how profound the connection could be between a man and his Kaylee. Those earlier, transient relationships would, in retrospect, be revealed as the insubstantial lust of youth when compared with the pinnacle connection made at the age of 30. All of this, of course, was ancillary to the primary purpose, that of having an educated, literate populace. Beauregard Excalibur Zakarian, Capitulo 85.
Wraith kept glancing sadly into Eve's office. He had been so vibrant, so vital. She knew he had been planning a trip around the world with his wife the first year of his retirement. Poor Larissa. She would be devastated by her loss. Wraith felt devastated and he was just her boss. Eve and Larissa were married nearly 40 years. Her office door opened and she looked up at the man who entered. He was blurry, which was when she realized tears were flooding her eyes. She snatched 3 or 4 tissues out of the dispenser on her desk and mopped her face while she glanced at Eve's calendar. In the space for this hour there was a drawing of a monk, which meant Eve was the only one who knew the identity of this man. He always doodled whenever he made an appointment, but never wrote down the details. He insisted on buying large planners to give him space for what he called his scribbles. Normally, she would have looked in his calendar first thing in the morning, and when she saw his drawing, she would ask him who he was expecting. He could always remember. Or if he forgot, the subject of his drawing would remind him. She thought of the stack of used planners she kept, with all his clever drawings and caricatures. She would never see another one from Eve again. Just thinking about it made her throat close as she tried to contain the emotions threatening to spill. She looked at the mystery visitor. He was a large man with short silver blonde hair and light-colored eyes. He was looking at her strangely.
"Are you okay?"
he asked. She glanced down at the desk calendar again. There was nobody else scheduled who would not already know about the tragedy. On the facing page was another scribble she had never seen before. It was on her birthday, and he had a drawing of a little goat balancing on a basketball with a cute caption and a birthday message for her. He knew she liked pictures of goats. The stranger's question, Eve doodle for her birthday, and the knowledge that she had several hours to pull herself together were her undoing. She started to sob. He gently pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her while she sobbed. He patted her back, giving her the wordless comfort she needed. It was almost 10 minutes before her tears dried up. When she felt the easing of tension in her body, she pulled away from him. She was embarrassed to see his shirt was damp from her tears.
"I'm so sorry, I really didn't mean to cry all over you."
She pointed to the drawing of a monk.
"Eve took this appointment, but neglected to write down your name."
"Is he not here?"
he asked, glancing into the empty office. He turned to look at her and she saw comprehension.
"Something has happened to Eve?"
Her tear-wet eyes met his curious ones, and she nodded.
"He died driving to work this morning."
Her voice broke on the utter finality of that statement. He slowly sank into the chair in front of her desk.
"I am very saddened to hear this. He was a dear friend to me and to my family."
His brow twitched into a perplexed frown, and he asked her.
"You were fond of him?"
The way he asked the question seemed peculiar.
"He's been like a father to me. I've known Eve since I left college. I started working for him a couple of weeks after I lost my own father."
Her voice broke up again.
"I apologize for insinuating anything untoward,"
he said.
"Well, they're letting me go now that Eve is gone. In 2 weeks, I'll need to find a new job."
She paused to blow her nose before adding.
"I found it distressing to learn both things at once."
"My name is Gregorio Zakarian."
He introduced himself finally.
"I have known Eve since I was in college, a little less than 10 years. I went to school with his youngest son. Eve and I spoke at length yesterday, and he asked me to come in this morning so I could continue my discussion with him. He knew he had very little time left to him."
"I'm Wraith Verone,"
she said. She thought back over the last few weeks. Eve had been a bit subdued, worried, forgetful, distracted.
"He told me yesterday how grateful he was to know his time was coming to a close. He and his wife were able to say their goodbyes. He hoped to discuss with you today that this would be his last day. He wanted you to know that the company would likely reorganize and lay you off. He hoped to find you another job. I confess, I wondered why he was so concerned about you. I see now he wished to cushion the blow of losing a surrogate father. He told me that your only family is a sister in New Jersey."
"Yes, but we don't really get along. She just had another baby yesterday."
She looked down and tapped the image of the goat on the calendar. She pitied her sister's kids for the chaos within which they were being raised. She was pretty sure Willow was preparing to dump her latest husband to start looking for greener pastures. She had moved to New Jersey after she married Blake Callahan, only to have his athletic career come to a screeching halt when he suffered a major injury during a football game.
"Eve told me he thought you would be willing to relocate, that you might enjoy the opportunity to live and work in Barcelona. I have come to offer you a year-long job if you are interested."
"Doing what?"
He gestured to the drawings in the open calendar.
"He told me you were the best assistant he has ever had, that he had a habit of doodling when speaking on the phone. And you could help him remember what appointment he made. You never got upset with his quirks, and you could read his mind."
Eve said those things to her often.
I loved working with him. He was special.
If you choose to take the job,
he said,
you would be my personal assistant. I work out of my home about an hour from Barcelona. I am the stable manager for a large stable. We breed, train, show, and sell Estolians, a horse native to my home nation of Estolia. I know it is quite different from your work here.
He gestured vaguely around the office.
However, I have need of an assistant with the skills that Eve insisted you possess. The position will include your own suite, as well as meals. You will have no living or travel expenses during the time we are together.
She frowned, her eyes meeting his with a troubled expression.
Did Eves also tell you I don't sleep around? I want it made clear I'm not planning on sleeping with you.
His expression was warmly approving.
I am glad to hear it. I am myself disinclined to indulge in an affair. I do not plan to make love to any woman other than the one I eventually marry. I am utterly celibate.
His statement was made without embarrassment.
When would the job start?
I will remain here long enough to pay my respects at Eves's funeral. If you can wrap up your affairs, we will be able to fly to Spain within a day or two after that.
And you'll pay my airfare?
Indeed. We will travel together on the corporate jet. You have a passport, yes?
Yes, Eve traveled a lot and needed me with him.
Her eyes met his when she added,
As his assistant only.
I believe you, Wraith.
He smiled at her.
You do not mind my calling you Wraith?
No, I don't mind. What shall I call you?
Gregorio is my preference, though you may call me Greg if that is easier. From time to time, during our professional association, I might have a meeting where I will wish you to refer to me as Mr. Zakarian. I shall let you know whenever that is the case.
The royal succession, Estolian traditions, promises we revere, certainty we hold dear. They questioned their faith and found solace instead. Deity's promises, never forgotten, never denied. Succession, Estolian traditions, promises we revere, certainty we hold dear.
In addition to the frenetic activity that took place around that period called the tipping point in human history, there were many innovations and alterations to the traditions that framed life in Estolia. While I did not grow up Estolian, I felt as though the changes instituted by the 88th Keeper were akin to a renaissance, fueling a rebirth of sorts that was, after the crises and their aftermath, refreshing all who were able to partake of those changes. Once I learned that some of the teaching positions would become permanent occupations within the temple, I decided that I had discovered my future. Anna and I would find great satisfaction living in the new temple village complex that Phoebe designed, and I would find even greater personal fulfillment in realizing my dream occupation, one which my marriage to Anna seemed to cut short. Gento, Lucook, and Scredo.
Gregorio had his arm around the shoulders of Eve's assistant as the words of the funeral service flowed over them. While the preacher discussed the ephemeral afterlife and the hope those in attendance had of meeting up with their loved ones at that time, he was thinking about the promises of deity he lived with every day of his life. How different this funeral was from those in Estolia. Even when a couple died at a young age, there was always a sense of the glorious horizon wherein the couple was together again, until time itself ceased to be. His thoughts switched from life and death to the more bounteous joys to be had for a man and his Kaylee. He felt sorrow at the thought of his cousins. The physical relationships they indulged in prior to marriage, prior to gifting their soul to their Kaylee, was shallow, and he was convinced they robbed some of the special magic from their future lifelong and eternal relationships. Would they ever understand what they gave up to experience transient desire and release? He was determined to give of himself only when he yielded up his soul. He pulled Wraith tighter up against his side as he recalled the decision to remain chaste until he found a woman to take his soul. Times like this, when faced with the finality of death and the severing of self and soul from body, he was grateful to the very depths of his marrow for the emotional support he received from his understanding of the promises of deity. He poured so much of his heart and soul into the Zacarian stable in Barcelona that he rarely thought about his lack of feminine companionship. He had 8 months before his own 30th birthday, and he was not sure he would find anyone. However, he felt safe in inviting Wraith to work for him for a year. The time he might take off to get married, in 8 months, would hardly affect her at all. She could work with Lucas or Josiah and would have a lot of correspondence from other nations or use the time to become better versed in a variety of languages, one of her hobbies, according to Eve. He felt a deep sadness to lose this man. He was one of the best men Gregorio had met outside of Estolia. His love and devotion for his wife were as deep and beautiful as that shared between many Estolian couples. After the service was over, they both expressed their heartfelt condolences to Eve, wife and sons. He felt emotionally drained when he finally escorted Wraith out to the limousine waiting to take them to the airport.
Apollion's lies, exacerbated, confused. Succession smooth rise, 'twas antiquated. The dagger was used. The royal succession, Estolian tradition. Promises we revere, certainty we hold dear. Promises of deity and the royal succession. Benefits we see, divine intervention. Witnessed and verified through each capitulo. Our faith tested, tried, the promises will flow. When you chase your dreams, your imagination streams.
Glorious Estoliana, the only thing that surpasses the beauty of this land is the vision of loveliness she encompasses when first viewed by the light of dawn. When possible, therefore, visitors should be first introduced to Estolia wearing her finest raiment, dawn, to create a memory over all other memories, one to warm their heart all the days of their lives. Ferdinand Plavius Zacarian, Capitulo 68.
The telephone rang, and when he answered the phone, Gregorio listened in numb disbelief to his father. His cousin, Zeke, had been preparing to depart on a trip to the United States and Europe when one of the carriage horses kicked him and snapped his leg.
Luckily,
his father said,
the leg was seen to immediately, so the doctors do not think he will lose it, but he will need months of therapy and recuperation.
Is this not peculiar?
He asked his father.
For the future keeper to be so badly injured only a few weeks before his 30th birthday.
You have great insight, Gregorio.
His father said.
I am blessed to have you as a son. It is unusual, but not unprecedented. Zeke's blessing when he became the last resort indicated that he would face some unusual difficulties. I would like you to fly here to Estolia to take over some of his duties while he recuperates.
I have developed a great working relationship with my assistant,
Gregorio said, adding reluctantly.
I would hate to have to replace her with someone else at this stage. Is it at all possible for her to travel to Estolia with me?
By all means, bring her with you.
His father said distractedly.
I will explain when you arrive exactly what I think is going on with your cousin, but I believe it will turn out okay in the end.
But you are not certain?
Gregorio felt a twinge of unease.
There is an ambiguity.
This is why you wish for me to come home?
Gregorio asked.
Yes, Gregorio, this is why.
When do you wish for the two of us to fly out?
Justice Albans will take over your position in Barcelona on Thursday.
Something in his father's tone caught his attention.
Justice? You want me to come home permanently?
His voice was sharp with the realization. Though he was pleased to be recalled to Estolia, he was also wary when he considered what his father was really trying to tell him.
Yes, son. I believe you need to return to Estolia. The royal stables have an opening. I think it is best if you fly home Friday. This will give you 2 weeks before your birthday.
Gregorio had a sinking suspicion.
You plan to force my hand.
Silence.
I have long since decided that I will not allow any but the most spiritual of connections to decide my hand.
Gregorio insisted. His father knew this already, but he felt the need to reiterate the decision he made just after his Bendelora.
We will discuss this when you arrive. The spirit has moved me to insist upon your recall. I felt the greatest of disquiet when your cousin's leg was almost severed. You must return home. However, the beginning and end of my urgency is seeing to your return to Estolia. I will honor above all others the impulse of the spirit, and so long as there is no contradiction, after I will honor your preferences. Will you have faith in me and in deity?
Yes, Father. I can do nothing else. You are, after all, the keeper.
And you are third in line to the throne, next in line to the position of keeper. You are needed at home.
His father's voice was firm. Wraith was working on correspondence with the Armo of Hath. Despite the great difficulties involved, he wanted to establish an Estolian stable in his country. If they could work out a deal, it would be a tremendous coup for the stable, and a major transaction with as many as 14 horses being sold at one time. Her telephone rang, and she picked it up just as Gregorio came into the office. It was the Armo of Hath. She pulled out her translation sheet, which helped her to remember the most critical words.
We have discussed the proposal, and my counterpart, the Lion of Hath, has declared we must act on this now, today even. As such, the Lion and the 7 leaders, plus their wives, will arrive in the morning. Can you accommodate us? We are aware this is inconvenient.
Certainly. I shall let our stable manager know you will be here. As I understand it, you will take care of the actual transport from Barcelona to Hath for all of the horses you acquire?
Yes, the Lion and I strongly feel our opportunity will disappear if we were to wait until our originally scheduled visit in 3 weeks. I will miss seeing you, my dear, as I must remain in Hath, but I feel as if we will meet at some point.
After she got the last of the details, she hung up and swiveled around to tell Gregorio the updated schedule. He was frowning at her, having understood none of her conversation in the language of Hath.
Gregorio, the contingent from Hath decided to move up their visit. They'll be here tomorrow.
Instead of looking excited, Gregorio looked like he barely heard her. He blinked a couple of times and then frowned, clearly focusing on what she said rather than on whatever was bothering him.
Say that again, Wraith. I was a bit distracted.
She explained the conversation she had and watched the excitement take hold in his face. Whatever was worrying him must not be too bad, she reasoned to herself, if he could focus on this exciting transaction. He leaned forward and pressed a button, saying,
I need Josiah!
For the next hour, Josiah, Gregorio, and Wraith walked through the different stables and selected the animals to be presented to the delegation the next day. Then they called a meeting with all the stable hands, explaining the need for extra work. Wraith added, as they wrapped up the meeting,
I'll get us a catered breakfast and lunch for tomorrow, and everyone will get a bonus.
Once they were back at the house, Wraith waited until after their dinner was served to ask,
What was on your mind earlier, Gregorio? You looked quite serious.
I have been asked to take over the royal stables in Estolia,
he said gently. It was almost 8 months since he first walked into her office at the Jenner Corporation, and she enjoyed working for him. Her eyes filled with tears at the thought that he was telling her that her job was over. She had hoped he would extend her 1-year contract with him indefinitely. His brow wrinkled when he caught sight of her tears.
I told them I wanted to bring you with me,
he clarified. She felt an easing in her heart. Wiping the tears off her face, she looked down at the plate of half-eaten food, working to calm the tremble in her voice, and said,
I don't want to stop working for you, Gregorio.
I was concerned about whether you would be willing to make another move so soon after your last one. It is a great honor for me to be asked to do this. The Estolian breed comes from Estolia, so this is the foundation for the entire breed. The Zacarian stables here in Barcelona are second only to the royal stable.
When will we move, and what about Adelphia and Zorro?
Her mare and Gregorio's stallion. They had been in Barcelona only a week when Adelphia yanked her lead rope out of the hands of the stable boy who was leading her towards a paddock, and she had cantered over to where Wraith was standing on the porch to the stable offices. In minutes they diagnosed love at first sight between the mare and Wraith, and she was told Adelphia was to be hers, a bonus for her willingness to work odd hours and live in at the stable residence. Since then she had learned that Gregorio had no choice but to give her the filly. She would not bond with anyone else. He smiled broadly.
They will be transported with us. We will fly to Estolia on Friday. We will go by cargo airplane so we can accompany the 2 horses.
The promises of deity and the royal succession, benefits we see, divine intervention, witnessed and verified through each capitulo. Our faith tested, tried, the promises will flow.
Your heart is pure and you're absolutely sure. The promises of deity and the royal succession, benefits we see, divine intervention, witnessed and verified through each capitulo. Our faith tested, tried, the promises will flow.
Courtship and wooing in Estolia are much different than in the greater world. A man might know with a deep certainty of the heart that one woman is right for him, and all he must do is wait until his 30th birthday to consummate the union. He does not expect to see the aura because deity has already told him that this woman is right for him. Alternatively, a man might see a woman's aura as he nears his birthday. In this situation, it is not unheard of for a couple to feel a deep compulsion to consummate the union, no matter how short their acquaintance has been. In the Estolian mindset, the viewing of an aura is a declaration from deity that the union cannot fail. Lazarus Ricardan Zakarian, Capitulo 84.
Wraith settled into one of the passenger seats in the cargo airplane that was taking them to Estolia. They were flying in the pre-dawn, and the flight was to take less than an hour.
Is there anything special I need to know before we get to Estolia?
She said.
As we will be working for the royal stables, we are likely to be greeted upon our arrival.
So early?
She asked.
Dawn is one of those times of the day that my people love to greet. Some prefer to sleep in, but it is considered a universal truth that there is nothing on earth more extraordinary than an Estolian dawn.
Who will greet us?
My father, my uncle Leo, and my cousin Isaiah are likely to greet us upon our arrival. They all occupy positions of great authority in our government.
All 3 will welcome us?
He nodded before adding,
Family is always close in Estolia. Isaiah's brother Zeke suffered a devastating injury last week. It is uncertain whether his injury will keep him from fulfilling his place in the hierarchy of our government. If he cannot fulfill his obligations, I will take his place. It will be a year before we know. That is why I have been recalled, so I might be instructed in the duties of the office I may be asked to fill.
Wraith sorted through everything he said. It sounded like the dynamics in his home country were quite complicated.
Where will I live?
There is a house reserved for the head of the royal stable, but it would be inappropriate to inhabit it together, as it is only suitable for a married couple. I have been told we will have a wing of the palace, either our own or in my father's wing.
Palace?
Hai did mention it was the royal stable I would be running. It, like the stable in Barcelona, is owned by the nation of Estolia.
Your father lives in the palace?
Yes, it is a tremendous building, built in antiquity and renovated many times over the centuries. Most of my extended family live there.
Their conversation tapered at that point. A short time later the intercom squawked, and when it was done, Gregorio told her they would be landing in 10 minutes. During the 8 months since they met, they ate their meals and worked together on and off throughout the day. Their non-standard hours worked well for them, and most days they did some work, but also found time for some leisure. Once Adelphia chose Wraith, he took time out of his schedule to teach her to ride.
It is fortunate that Adelphia chose you.
He said during one of their earliest lessons.
In this way, you will understand Andestolians better than book learning could ever duplicate. You will make a much better assistant with such personal knowledge.
I've seen the invoices for fillies like Adelphia,
she said.
Isn't she a rather pricey bonus?
He laughed at that.
Adelphia chose you. The most difficult factor in raising Andestolians is that they must choose their own rider. That is one of the main reasons that their price is so high. We have extensive grounds and multiple stable blocks because we cannot just ship 20 or 50 yearlings off to the sales. We must care for them until they find their soulmate. We might have supported Adelphia for 5 or more years waiting for her to find her life partner.
Gregorio was an attractive man. His silver blonde hair gave him a boyish air. When his large, trim physique was pressed against her, during some of her earliest riding lessons, she thought him anything but boyish. She warned him off when she first met him, but she wished she had not. If he ever seemed interested in her, she would forget every objection she ever had to becoming sexually active. She wanted Gregorio Zakarian. The fear of intimacy she faced since her sister's confidences about losing her virginity seemed to have faded. She knew she had nothing to fear, not with Gregorio. And yet, he seemed indifferent to her. He never indicated that she was anything more than a highly valued employee. He was a physical, demonstrative man, freely complimenting her on her work, her horsemanship, and occasionally her outfit or appearance. But as much as he clearly meant what he said, and was a man who felt delight in the events and people in his life, she was not even sure he recognized her as a woman. Her dreams were always full of him, his handsome profile, his broad shoulders and solid musculature. His earthy scent when he came in after riding his stallion. He was eye candy, as her sister Willow was fond of characterizing the men she met, slept with, and occasionally married. In Wraith's dreams she admired every inch of his body, as he undressed, pressed his virile length against her, and then possessed her. By the time she had worked for him for 6 months, she was sure she would have a loveless, husbandless, childless future. Gregorio was the only unattached man she spent any time with, and marriage, to her mind, was best accomplished young. In 6 months, she would be 25 and her prospects were swirling down the drain. If she was honest, she did not really care. She enjoyed being with Gregorio, dreaming about him, and remaining close to him. She doubted any other man who came into her orbit would be able to catch her interest now, not when compared with him, even though he treated her with the same amount of attention as he would give a beloved sister. Her eyes were closed, trying to block out his attractive face and body. She opened them in surprise when one of Gregorio's large hands took hers, squeezing tightly.
Thank you for coming with me, Wraith. You are indispensable to me. I was planning to talk with you sometime this month to discuss an extension of your contract, but we have been working flat out since I got recalled, so I never had the chance. I wanted you to know I have never had an assistant as skilled as you are, and I value you highly. I did not realize exactly what I was going to get when I promised Eve that I would take you as my assistant, but I should have trusted his instincts.
I'm glad you offered me the job. It has been incredibly stimulating.
Working in the offices of the Jenner Corporation had stifled her in many ways. Being Gregorio's assistant, while similar, was also more diverse, especially once she fell in love with Adelphia and learned to ride. She could not imagine ever working in a job that did not center around horses.
Promises of deity and the royal succession. Benefits we see, divine intervention, witnessed and verified through each capitulo. Our faith tested, tried, the promises will flow.
anticipation, I wait, I yearn to see, to feel the sensation of your aura taking me. The fireflies spark, the incandescent glow, bright in the dark, both our souls now know.
Free will, the freedom to make choices even when they are wrong, is one of the ultimate gifts of deity. Alexandros Martavius, Capitulo 37.
The airplane shuddered, preparing to land. Gregorio gave her hand a final squeeze before he let it go and tidied up his paperwork, putting it into his briefcase, snapped it shut, and placed it between their seats. He was a tidy, methodical man. She valued that as much as his many other qualities. The airplane set down on the tarmac. Once it came to a halt, she stood and prepared to go to the rear to release Adelphia, but Gregorio detained her.
If my father brought my uncle and cousin, it is important you meet them first. Adelphia has Zorro to keep her company.
The two horses were always very friendly, and now Zorro was nuzzling Adelphia. It looked like he was whispering sweet nothings to her. He was right, they would be fine. Gregorio escorted her to the front entrance of the airplane, holding her hand tightly. It was glorious outside with the sunrise painting the sky 1,000 different colors. The air was crisp. There was no motorized transport visible, just carriages. One was pulled by draft horses and looked like it was designed to carry cargo. The other two were both open-topped. One was pulled by 4 white horses, while the other had 4 matched bays. 3 men stood next to the carriage with the white horses.
My uncle and cousin are here along with my father.
Gregorio said. His voice held a childish anticipation. He was happy to be home. Something was worrying him, but he was a happier man since she had agreed to accompany him and remain his assistant in Estolia. Just as they began to descend the stairs, the sun burst over the top of the world, throwing into bold relief the beautiful details of Estolia. Her heart swelled at the incredible beauty of the unspoiled countryside. She would remember this experience for the rest of her life. They were near an impressive mountain with a peculiar rocky crown thrust out of the peak like the vertical wood columns of a palisade in a Wild West period drama. The rapidly rising sun gave the columns further detail, and she was reminded of a series of photos Eve showed her after his vacation to Great Britain. They were of a place called the Giant's Causeway, a series of hexagonal basaltic columns formed by volcanoes. She remembered Eve's description because the words he used were so out of character, and his doodles for the next few weeks were drawings of the stone columns. There was something unique about the mountain she was looking at. Perhaps, in time, she would learn everything there was to know about it. Once her attention shifted from the mountain, she noticed more details about the people and horses on the ground. Several mounted men looked like an honor guard. The horseflesh on parade was high quality, gorgeous, well cared for and Estolians. The Zakarian stables in Barcelona had beautiful animals, some of the best on the planet, but the very best were found here in Estolia. The 3 men approached while they descended the steps. The youngest man was a few years older than Gregorio and wore a thick ornate crown. This man must be a prince or a king. The 2 older men were also dressed strangely. Like royalty. One was wearing an outfit like the younger man, with a slender crown. The other wore a robe with bright colors and absurdly long sleeves. His hands were clasped together and the heavily embroidered sleeves came together in a deep V shape falling almost to the hem. Gregorio guided her to the man with the ornate crown and said,
Wraith, this is my cousin, Isaiah Monterey Zakarian, Duke, Sovereign, and King of Estolia. Isaiah, this is my assistant Wraith Veroni.
The king pulled her into his arms for a welcoming embrace.
Thank you for coming on such short notice in the face of our current emergency,
he said. He turned to Gregorio and said, his tone one of relief and happiness.
The doctors say that Zeke is no longer likely to lose his leg. He did require 3 separate operations before they felt confident it would turn out okay. He will always have a limp, but he will recover. They tell me he will come home on or before his birthday.
I am much relieved, Isaiah.
Gregorio said.
Your father says it was always written within his blessing. He just never read it with the right lens to see what he was being told.
At the mention of Gregorio's father, the man in the ornate robe stepped forward. Gregorio put an arm around her shoulders and said,
Wraith, this is my father, Theobaldo Reginald Zakarian, the keeper of the soul of Estolia, former last resort, and former first consul. Father, this is Wraith Michelle Veroni. She is the best assistant I have ever had.
I would be most pleased if you would call me Theo.
He extended both hands toward her, palms up. She glanced at his hands and felt a peculiar sensation of homecoming that made little sense in the context of the moment. At his silent urging, she placed her hands in his. His hands were strong and the way they gripped her was firm and unyielding. Time seemed to stand still as his eyes searched hers. He seemed to be weighing up her soul. Finally, he released her hands and said,
You are quite enchanting, my dear. I can see now why my son was unwilling to part with you.
The third man stepped forward and smiled at her.
You are very welcome here, Wraith. I am Gregorio's uncle, Leo.
The king laughed and said,
Wraith, this is the King Emeritus, my father, Balthazar Leopold Zakarian. Father, this is Wraith Verone. She will be working as Gregorio's assistant at the royal stables. This is especially critical because Uncle Theo will be able to train him in case Zeke is unable to fulfill his duties as keeper.
After the introductions were complete, Gregorio said to her,
Come, we must help unload the horses.
In anticipation, I wait, I yearn to see, to feel the sensation of your aura taking me. The firefly spark, the incandescent glow, bright in the dark, both our souls now know. Fascinated, entranced, your aura speaks to me, by deity enhanced, love will forever be. In anticipation, I wait, I yearn to see, to feel the sensation of your aura taking me. The firefly spark, the incandescent glow, bright in the dark, both our souls now know. Fascinated, entranced, your aura speaks to me, by deity enhanced, love will forever be.
I do not know if any other man has seen an aura as specific or delightful as the one I saw, when first I viewed the delightful Antania. There she stood, bedraggled, pale from weeks kept in a cargo hold, with hollow cheeks and bruises under each eye. She was gathering together the 5 children she had been told to care for, and I looked at her, and all I could see, aside from the magnificent glow of her aura, was the 4 ghostly images holding the hands of the 5 children. It was as if I saw the aura of 5 individuals on that day. Much later in my life, as the midwife passed my 3rd daughter into my arms just after her birth, I realized in an instant that the substance of her soul had included all 4 of the children she would bring into our union. I was admonished at an early age to have faith in the promises of deity, told that if I was willing to keep my faith, that I would have immeasurable rewards. My 5 adopted children, 4 natural children, and of course my Antania, have been a reward I would have considered incomprehensible. Feldrum Inscrito.
Once they arrived at the stable, Gregorio instructed Wraith to settle both of their horses. While she worked, his thoughts wandered. He and his younger brother Dominic had both decided in their teens that they would depart from tradition. Gregorio decided to hold off on experiencing sexual gratification and intimacy until he discovered his Kaylee through the viewing of the aura. Dominic's plan was different. He was inexplicably scarred by one of the ensayos they read as young boys. As a result, he concluded that the Estolian way required seduction and sometimes even abduction, and it was not going to be his way. Dominic's plan was to remove all temptation, and live his life celibate and alone, never knowing the warmth of feminine companionship. He did not wish to be tempted to tread upon the rights of any woman. The brothers often discussed their perceptions with each other. Gregorio did not see seduction and abduction when he read the capítulos and ensayos. But Dominic was inflexible in his views. Their father did not seem to be worried, even in the face of their rebellious declarations just after their respective blessings at 18. As Gregorio watched Wraith lead the horses into the stable, his father spoke quietly from behind him.
Wraith is an interesting name. She is beautiful.
Gregorio's fascination with his assistant was obvious to his family.
I did not invite her to Estolia for her beauty. She is very organized.
Gregorio asserted.
Wraith is one of the reasons I had you return. She belongs here in Estolia. It will be interesting to discover who will see her aura. Perhaps your cousin Zeke will see it.
Gregorio rejected the notion that any Estolian might claim her and take her away from him. He looked at Wraith again, wanting nothing more than to go to her side, touch her, kiss her, and then quite shamelessly claim her. He shook his head, trying to shake the sudden erotic turn his thoughts were taking. Clearing his throat, he said loudly,
Wraith, my father and I will be right outside when you are done with Adelphia.
Gregorio left the stable and sat on a bench under an olive tree. His father sat next to him.
In all the time I have been with Wraith, I have treated her as a valued employee. That will not change here in Estolia.
He glanced at the stable, imagining the Wraith within, wishing suddenly that she would show him her aura. The aura, a firefly spark, the visual manifestation of direct soul-to-soul communication, where one's soul recognized its perfect mate. But surely, he thought to himself, if she was going to show her aura, she would have done it by now. Especially considering how much he loved her. The thoughts flying through his mind were revelatory. He did love her. He probably had from the beginning, which explained why he so frequently dreamed of her body entwined with his, her warmth of spirit warming his, for the rest of time. Everything that she was he loved. Perhaps, he thought hopefully, now that he had recognized his feelings, her aura would manifest. He shook his head slightly and returned his attention to his father. He knew that he had missed some of what he said. His father chuckled, shaking his head ruefully.
I think you never truly studied the capítulos and ensayos the way you should have during your acolyte year. You and your brother were too full of your plans for rebellion to pay proper attention.
He sighed, but to Gregorio, the sound was one of contentment instead of exasperation.
I am sorry we were such a trial to you, father.
Gregorio said.
You must take the time to open your heart to the Spirit. Allow deity to guide you in ways that you have avoided for your entire life. I decided I would not interfere beyond asking you to come home prior to your birthday. The rest is up to you.
He needed to change to a less volatile subject.
What is going to happen with Zeke? Is it not unheard of for the Keeper to be unable to experience the greatest blessings of deity?
He asked. His father's voice was measured, slipping into the teaching cadence that Gregorio remembered from his acolyte year.
It has happened a couple other times. In all those cases, it was some extraordinary event that prevented the future keeper from consummating his union on his birthday. I believe that deity acts for the good of our nation. Someday, Zeke will see why he was made to experience this setback.
Gregorio's attention was diverted from the trials of his cousin by the reappearance of Wraith. She was as beautiful as ever with her large blue-green eyes, kissable lips and toffee-colored hair, but she did not glow with an aura. She was the same woman he had lived with for the last 8 months. He tried to contain the disappointment he felt. If she did not show him her aura, he doubted he would ever see any aura. How could any other woman compete with her? Especially when she held his heart and mind. He got to his feet and crossed to her side, asking,
Are they all settled?
Yes,
she said.
I'm impressed by the extent of the royal stables here.
She gestured at the sprawling complex, the large draft horses in the nearby field, and an Andistolian stallion in the paddock just behind them.
It's amazing.
Theo responded.
Estolia is almost entirely equestrian-based transport. Because of this, the royal stables serve a critical need.
Wraith was shown to an enormous bedroom by one of the servants in the palace. She had never fully realized how exalted Gregorio's family connections were. But once she got over the shock at their titles and positions, she began to get a sense that there were elements to the nation of Estolia that did not fit in the greater world. The king seemed to expect her to treat him with great casualness, just as he was treated by those who worked in the immense palace. She took a shower, wrapped one of the warmed towels around her body, and was looking through the clothing in her suitcase when there was a tap on her door. Before she could respond, it opened and two women stepped into the room, a brunette and a redhead. The brunette closed the door behind her and grinned.
"You must be Wraith,"
the redhead said. She crossed over to Wraith, still standing in just a towel.
"I'm Lilane."
She gestured to the other woman.
"And this is Cassie. We will be formally introduced later, but we didn't want to wait."
Cassie moved closer to Lilane.
"We wanted to make sure you would be able to dress properly for the celebration."
"I don't really know what to wear,"
Wraith admitted. For the last 8 months she lived and worked at the Zakarian stable in Barcelona. They did not have fancy celebrations, though they did have some formal occasions, like when the delegation from Hath had visited. But in those situations, she was working, and it was easy to make decisions from the perspective of work. The celebration feast here in Estolia was a family affair, and she did not have a pre-planned outfit to wear. Cassie crossed over to a door that led to a large walk-in closet. Most of her clothes were already in the closet, but what stood out to Wraith was a beautiful dress in gold and silver.
"Please wear this dress, Wraith,"
Lilane pleaded with her.
"Okay,"
Wraith said. She felt awkward.
"Great,"
Cassie grinned.
"We will leave you to get dressed."
She grabbed Lilane's hand and the two left as swiftly as they had arrived.
The glorious aura supplies us, heals the cavernous rift of our soul's emptiness. The firefly spark, the incandescent glow, brighten the dark, both our souls now know. Fascinated, entranced, your aura speaks to me, by deity enhanced. Love will forever be. Our faith tested, tried, divine intervention, witnessed and verified, and the royal succession. Through each capitulate, benefits we see, the promises will flow, the promises of deity.
While the aura of any woman, as the visible manifestation of the soul within, can be seen by only one man, the keeper is given the ability to discern much within the soul of any person. Euphrates Camargue, Capitulo 24.
The dress was very high quality, the fabric felt extraordinary. When she put it on, it fit her perfectly. She caressed the silky soft material of her sleeve as she looked at the cheaper dresses hanging in the closet. She was turning away from the closet when a light tap on the door heralded another visitor. The door swung open as she approached it. It was Gregorio. He looked at her and then froze, staring at her. She felt the heat of a blush rise at the intensity of his expression.
"I do not think, Wraith, I ever appreciated before just how beautiful you are."
His voice was solemn.
"I have never seen that dress before."
"I wasn't sure what I should wear,"
she admitted.
"But then a couple of women popped in and suggested I wear this. It was already in my closet."
"Oh?"
He grinned.
"Did they give their names?"
"Cassie and Lilane."
He extended an arm to her and she set her hand on it. He lifted his other hand to settle it over hers, caressing it briefly before leading her towards the door.
"You will meet both of them again tonight."
During the long walk, she noticed beautiful paintings adorned the walls. The trim between ceiling and walls was intricate, the attention to detail typical of late 19th and early 20th century architecture. The furniture was beautifully preserved. Antiques were everywhere.
I didn't realize you were royalty when you told me you had relatives who held elevated positions within your government.
Normally, it is unremarkable, particularly since our nation is so small.
He looked away from her, a solemn expression on his face.
It is only worth noting when one has the misfortune to be born to one of the hereditary positions. Since I was born second in line to the position of keeper, I am aware the obligations I have may change if my cousin is unable to take up his duties.
She felt fear.
Are you telling me I might not remain your assistant if you have to take the position?
It will be more than a year before we will know. You will remain my assistant at least that long. I rather treasure having you here with me,
he said before looking away. When they entered the large sitting room, Wraith saw the beautiful brunette, Cassie, holding the arm of a man with dark receding hair.
Sorry, Wraith, my family is rather fond of formal introductions. We will try to keep it short.
Gregorio whispered in her ear. His arm went around her waist and he guided her towards the king. Next to him was the beautiful Lilane.
Isaiah.
Gregorio bowed to his cousin.
Wraith, this is Lilane Zakarian, Queen of Estolia, mother of Leonidas, the future King of Estolia, and most importantly, the one who keeps the soul of the king. Lilane, this is Wraith Verone. I understand the two of you met briefly earlier.
Lilane smiled and said,
Cassie and I invaded her bedroom when she wasn't wearing anything more than a towel.
She giggled and glanced over at the brunette, gesturing her over.
Luckily, she wasn't offended. I see the dress fits you perfectly. I must introduce Cassie.
She dragged Cassie up close to her side.
Cassiopeia Luke Dumaine. And her husband, Morgan Luke Dumaine. This is Wraith Verone. Cassie is my husband's sister.
It is so wonderful to meet you formally,
Cassie said. She dimpled a smile at her husband before saying,
I was enthralled the minute I met you, Wraith. Such a lovely name. You are a different build from Lilane and myself. When I saw you, I instantly had dozens of ideas.
Wraith wondered what this woman was babbling about. Or perhaps, she thought to herself, bubbling over was a better description. Her husband groaned and covered his eyes in mock agony. Lilane's laughter tinkled through the room. She grinned over at her husband before explaining to Wraith.
When Cassie gets ideas, we all watch out. Her ideas can have a life of their own.
She moved closer to the other woman and took one of her hands and said,
Best to tell us all quickly about your ideas so we'll know what to expect.
Cassie's husky laughter followed that statement and she shook her head.
It is nothing like that, Lil. It is just that Wraith looks like she is the perfect size and perfect age for some fashion ideas I have.
She looked Wraith up and down and asked,
How old are you? 24?
I'll be 25 in a few months.
Wraith admitted.
There.
Cassie said triumphantly to Lilane.
The perfect age. Only a few years younger than us. The same age when we got married. And she is perfect for the colours of Estolia. I know we have a celebration planned in 2 weeks for Gregorio's birthday.
She stepped closer to Wraith and grabbed both of her hands to plead.
Please, will you allow me to design something for you to wear?
Wraith felt uncomfortable with so many people looking at her and agreed quickly.
I knew you would say yes. I already told the royal dressmaker, Natasha, what I wanted.
Cassie bubbled.
She tells me she loves speaking with me because I always have the most extraordinary ideas for beautiful dresses. Unfortunately, I cannot sew a button, and certainly could never make my ideas. But she tells me I have a gift with words, and one of her apprentices has a gift to listen and make my ideas. We will all wear the colours of Estolia. She will design a green dress for Lilane.
Cassie paused only long enough to pick up a lock of Lilane's red hair before continuing.
And a purple dress for me and a golden dress for you, Wraith. The dresses are quite simple, but we will look most elegant in them.
Cassie was one of the world's happy people. It was no wonder Morgan Luke Dumaine was in love with her. Wraith was reminded of the day she met Gregorio. It was the day after her birthday, and she was lamenting the fact that she would never marry at the perfect age of 23. In 4 months, she would be 25.
From a young age, I was convinced the perfect age to marry was 23. My sister was on her 3rd marriage by the time she was that age.
She told the two women.
I'm not so sure that there is a perfect age to marry.
Morgan joined the conversation.
I would say Cassie was utterly perfect when we married, and she was 24.
As the couple's eyes locked, and they shared a moment of silent communication, Wraith looked away. Her eyes met Gregorio's and, for a heartbeat, the rest of the people in the room faded out. She was reminded of the recurring dream she had the previous night, of Gregorio declaring himself hers, telling her she was the one woman worthy of breaking his celibacy, the woman with whom he wished to spend eternity. She flushed and her eyes left his, lingering on his lips before she turned away slightly.
If I can pry Wraith away from the two of you,
Gregorio teased the two women.
I would like to introduce her to my mother. You will have the chance to corner her some other time.
His hand on her shoulder urged her towards his father, who was speaking with his uncle.
My dear, you look exquisite.
Theo said to her.
Thank you for doing us the honor of joining us, and for being willing to relocate to Estolia. I would like to introduce you to the most important person in the entire nation, Georgiana Zakarian, the woman who keeps my soul safe and who guides me, as I myself guide the nation spiritually. No other person holds as much power. Georgiana, this is Wraith Veroni. She will be assisting Gregorio with the royal stables. He will also begin his elder year quite soon, so he might receive the necessary training, just in case Zeke is unable to take up his hereditary role.
It's a pleasure to meet you,
Wraith said. Georgiana was a remarkable-looking woman. Her hair was silver blonde with undertones of ripe wheat yellow. Wraith knew now where Gregorio got his blonde coloring. She had been in some sort of devastating accident that scarred her face and deprived her of one of her arms below the elbow. She wore a patch over one eye.
Welcome to Estolia,
she said, her voice mellow but deep. She looked at her son.
I'm glad you were willing to do as your father asked and come back home to us.
Gregorio embraced his mother.
I could not deny Father's request, not in light of Zeke's injury. Once I decided to return, I knew it was the right decision. I am glad to be back home for good.
Next, Gregorio led Wraith over to the former king, who stood next to a petite woman with dark hair that had a sheen of iron grey at each temple.
Wraith, this is Jacqueline Zakarian, the former Queen of Estolia. She goes by Jackie. Aunt Jackie, this is Wraith Verone, my assistant.
Jackie embraced Wraith.
You grace our home with your presence,
she said.
We are especially grateful for your willingness to join us here in Estolia in this difficult time.
Her chin trembled and she looked away, squeezing her eyes shut before taking a deep breath to continue speaking. Wraith had the feeling that she was garrulous in the face of the emotional turmoil of having her son so grievously injured.
We are quite blessed that my husband's late uncle was an orthopedic surgeon in the early half of this century, before being a surgeon was fashionable, and before he had to retire to become the king of Estolia.
I'm constantly amazed by the way deity impacts our lives,
Gregorio said.
Healing bones was one of Uncle Max's obsessions. Because of this, our nation had the infrastructure that was necessary to save Zeke's leg.
Jackie nodded.
Yes, they say the quality of our orthopedic wing of the hospital is unsurpassed.
She looked down at her hands. Wraith saw she was trembling.
I was told we came quite close to losing him.
She looked up again and smiled, brushing away a couple of tears.
Theo's blessing was clear. Zeke will survive and he will keep his leg.
When you chase your dreams, your imagination strings, and your heart is pure, and you're absolutely sure your dreams will in turn, with your resolve so firm, embrace all of you, your soul through and through. Our faith tested, tried, divine intervention, witnessed and verified, and the royal succession. Through each capitulo, benefits we see, the promises will flow, the promises of deity. When you chase your dreams, your imagination.
Michael Othello once asked me about my nation and faith. He did not believe that any nation's character could be as beautiful as Estolia. To explain, I chose to share an analogy. Michael employed only the very best, from his chef to his chauffeur to executives who ran his companies. When his chef brought us delightful fruit tarts, I watched him dig into the dessert with great gusto and asked him, "Does your chef ever let you down?" He laughed at the notion, and when I asked why, he said, "She would never purchase or use ingredients that were not the very best possible product." To his mind, that answered my question. I then pointed out to him that the way Estolia has triumphed over the negative flaws of spite, jealousy, envy, covetousness, and other base human motivations was the same as his chef's method of preparing superb desserts, by only allowing the best ingredients into the dessert in the first place. Not everyone who is born in Estolia remains there. There are those who find the lifestyle and limitations uncomfortable. They leave and strengthen Estolia through their absence. Conversation with Michael Othello and Ezekiel Zakarian.
Wraith watched as a half-dozen heavy-bodied birds flew overhead. The other women stopped talking. Even if they continued, she would not have been able to hear them.
Willowalu, Willowalu.
The birds were loud. Luckily, they did not take long to pass overhead. While they were interrupting the conversation, Wraith reflected on the previous 2 weeks. During that time, she and Gregorio had done very little of the job they were there to do. Sebastian and Melanie, Gregorio's uncle and aunt, were the masterminds behind the anti-Stolian program. For the last 30 years they had been selectively breeding the horses to strengthen the gene that caused a horse to bond with only one person. Sebastian was 60, and Melanie a decade or so younger. As vigorous as they were, Wraith was not sure why Gregorio was recalled. The only work Wraith and Gregorio did was review the 5, 10, and 30-year plans that Melanie and Sebastian had outlined, with breed refinements they would focus on over the next 20 or more years. Other than that, they spent most of their time visiting with family members and friends of Gregorio.
It is a time of great ambiguity.
Gregorio explained to her one evening.
With the family focused on my cousin's injury, I believe they do not wish to have me devote myself wholeheartedly to the stable, in case I need to take his place. As it is, we will only work in an advisory capacity until Zeke's situation is resolved. That could take a full year.
She had wanted to ask further questions, but the brooding expression on Gregorio's face kept her silent. Something had been bothering him since they first arrived in Estolia, but she did not know what it was. She and the other women were sitting in one of the sunlight terrace courtyards on an upper level of the palace. From that vantage point they could see over the back of Mount Zacharias, down to the Zakarian Plateau and the extensive royal stables.
The Willowall is our national bird,
Georgiana said.
They flourished on all of the Balearic Islands, and in southern Italy, Sicily, and Corsica, where they were called the Wallard Swan. But they're fearless, and something like the dodo, they were easy prey when non-native species decimated them. Now they are only in Estolia, and the surrounding smaller islands like Corlia and Pequeño.
The sweet bird song of some of the smaller birds of Estolia was like a musical chorus in the background. It was strange to think she had been in Estolia only 2 weeks.
Estolia is a paradise,
Wraith said.
I don't think I would have believed anyone if they described it to me.
She smiled at the 3 women with whom she was having tea. Georgiana, Melanie, and the former queen, Jackie.
I don't think I'll ever want to leave.
Did you know that all 3 of us came here temporarily?
Melanie asked.
I came here with my best friend Bethany, so she and I could write a book about Estolia. Jackie came here because her father asked Theo's father to take care of her after his death. and Bethany saved Georgiana's life and asked if she could come here to recuperate.
Where is Bethany now? Did she leave Estolia?
All three women looked somber.
No.
Jackie said.
She and her husband died shortly after they married.
She glanced at Georgiana and opened her mouth, as if to add something, but then closed it after the two women seemed to share a silent thought. Georgiana added,
We don't often speak about it.
Her voice was muted. She said,
It was a sorrowful time here in Estolia to lose so fine a family.
The women were silent for several minutes. At last, Jackie broke the silence.
I heard you and Gregorio rode up to the top of Mount Estoliana to watch the sunrise over Mount Zacharias.
Wraith smiled.
It was more beautiful than I could have imagined. I can see why it's a favorite thing to do. Gregorio said it's typical to celebrate on the day before rather than the birthday itself by riding up to see the dawn.
We celebrate the end of a year of life rather than the beginning of the next year,
Jackie said. She turned towards Georgiana and added,
I received word that Zeke will be released from the hospital wing today. Tonight's celebration will have two purposes, for Gregorio's birthday and for Zeke's healing. He will be able to join us briefly prior to dinner, though it will be some time before he is able to sit through a meal with us.
Wraith liked the way she was included in conversations, how she was treated like family rather than as Gregorio's assistant. They were almost finished with their tea when Cassie and Lillian joined them. Both were bubbling over. They were always bubbling over with good humor. Cassie could speak endlessly on dozens of topics without seeming to breathe. Wraith enjoyed listening to her transparent happiness overflowing.
Isaiah tells me that Zeke will be out of the hospital wing today.
Lillian said, her voice rich and happy.
I am so glad.
Jackie's voice was dry when she said, looking at Wraith.
We will finally be able to introduce Wraith to Zeke. You will like him.
When you chase your dreams, your imagination streams, and your heart is pure, and you're absolutely sure your dreams will in turn, with your resolve so firm, embrace all of you, your soul through and through. In anticipation, I wait, I yearn to see, to feel the sensation of your aura taking me. The fireflies spark the incandescent glow, brighten the dark, both our souls now.
When my oldest son received his Bendelora from my brother, I realized that in 12 short years I would be yielding up my crown to him. With the construction of both the temple and the palace, it seemed as if the years themselves were flowing with rapidity behind us, as the water of the sea recedes with the same swiftness behind the stern of a ship in a brisk wind. After my son was installed in the temple barracks as an acolyte, I met with my brother in the cavern that was to be the office for the keeper of the soul of Estolia. I looked around the chamber and was struck forcefully that here, in this chamber, the progress was most notable. 3 features grabbed the attention of those who entered the office: the massive conference table, the green and black marble statue of Zacharias, and the bastet, as Key's wife Mary called it, nearly half my height, on a pedestal fashioned by Key, the solid gold statue of a feline. Theodulphus Hieronymus, Capitulo 4.
Later that evening, Wraith, Cassie, and Lillian made a grand entrance wearing the dresses that Cassie dreamed up the day she met Wraith. The rest of the family were already in the large lounge. Morgan and Isaiah were quick to claim their wives, leaving Wraith standing alone just inside the entrance to the room. She still felt shy around this gregarious family. Gregorio came over to her, his expression warm and appreciative as he admired her new dress.
Come, Wraith, I should like to introduce you to my cousin Zeke,
he said. But before they could move, his parents approached and Georgiana took her son's arm, while Theo took Wraith's. Wraith sensed something underlying the interaction between Gregorio and his parents, but did not have a chance to try to analyze it. Theo tucked her hand in the crook of his arm and steered her towards a man in a wheelchair. "This must be Zeke," Theo said, along the same vein as similar jests throughout the last 2 weeks.
Perhaps my nephew Zeke will fall in love with you, Wraith. In Estolia, we believe that men naturally fall in love when they turn 30. As it is Zeke's birthday tomorrow, it would be the perfect time.
Georgiana added,
"We would certainly love to keep you here in Estolia forever. You fit. Not everyone does, but you do."
Wraith glanced at Gregorio and saw that his expression was dark. A reflection, perhaps, of the instantaneous rejection she felt inside herself at the thought of anyone other than Gregorio falling in love with her. She looked away from him, aware of the heat of a blush on her cheeks. They were at the casual arrangement of chairs surrounding the man in the wheelchair.
"Have a seat, please,"
he said to them.
"I feel like I am lacking in manners every time someone joins me, especially lovely ladies I have never met."
He grinned up at her. Wraith quickly sat in the chair he indicated, smiling at him. He was fair, but much darker compared to Gregorio. Even without the wheelchair and complicated device protecting his leg, she would have been able to tell that he was recuperating from a serious injury. The skin on his face was puffy, slightly yellowed, and the lines between his brows looked recent, but permanent.
"My cousin did not tell me his new assistant was so beautiful."
He took her hands in his, like Theo did when she first arrived, and his smile was even warmer than before as he said,
"My name is Lazarus Ezekiel, and I feel like I have been resurrected just to meet such a lovely, radiant visitor."
"It's a pleasure to meet you,"
Wraith said. When he showed no signs of letting go of her hands, she said, clearing her throat,
"Are you called Lazarus, Ezekiel, or Zeke? I've heard all three."
His hands squeezed hers tightly and his eyes flicked over to Gregorio before returning to focus on her.
"I normally go by Zeke, though you may call me Ezekiel if you prefer."
Gregorio's arm slid around her waist, pulling her hands from Zeke's.
"I am sorry. I have not done a very good job of making the introduction."
Gregorio's voice was deep, loud in a sudden lull in the conversations swirling around them.
"Wraith, this is Lazarus Ezekiel Zakarian. Last resort to his older brother Balthazar Isaiah Zakarian, the 88th king of Estolia. Zeke is the first consul to the king, second son of the 87th king of Estolia, and the one destined to keep the soul of Estolia once he finds the woman able to keep his soul."
Wraith wondered why Gregorio was suddenly being so overpoweringly formal. His arm around her waist was holding her very tightly, as if he did not really want to introduce her to his cousin.
"As I said, please call me Zeke."
Gregorio's jaw clenched and the two measured glances for more than a minute before Wraith felt him relax slightly, though he pulled her even closer as he said,
"Zeke, this is Wraith Michelle Veroni, the best assistant I ever had. She is—"
He broke off what he was saying abruptly. After a second, she turned and looked up at him. He was looking at her strangely and he had gone pale. His eyes were troubled as they met hers. He opened his mouth, but it was several seconds before he finally started to speak again.
"Wraith is—"
His complexion, pale next to the silver blonde of his hair, suddenly regained its color, as his cheeks flooded with red. He was also breathing heavily and his eyes moved rapidly, as if he was trying to read a message in her eyes. He shook his head and closed his mouth and turned to look at his cousin.
"She is the best assistant I have ever had. I do not intend to ever let her go."
A muscle jerked in his cheek. His chest rose and fell. She shifted her position slightly, wondering what was going on.
"Congratulations, cousin,"
Zeke said softly. She turned to look at Zeke. His expression was a strange mixture of jealousy and pleasure. His voice neutral again, Gregorio said.
"Deity knows us, grants those with the greatest faith the blessings they deserve. You will heal."
He looked down at Wraith and smiled at her. He seemed to have recovered from whatever had disturbed him so profoundly. He did not look back at his cousin as he added,
"I believe that you will overcome your current trials, Zeke. Even after only 1 week of instruction with my father, I feel as though I can say this with the strength and weight of the keeper of the soul of Estolia. A role I am convinced will never be mine. I would much rather be a humble breeder of Andestolians than take on your future job."
Shortly after this strange exchange, Gregorio and Zeke relaxed and spoke of more general topics, telling Wraith about some of the peculiar features of the island. While they chatted, Gregorio kept her tucked up next to his side, every so often looking down at her with a strange smile and hugging her close.
The glorious aura supplies us, heals the cavernous rift of our soul's emptiness. The firefly spark, the incandescent glow, brighten the dark, both our souls now know. Fascinated, entranced, your aura speaks to me, by deity enhanced. Love will forever be
a sacred prophecy about three brothers, the sons of Lilane, was like no other. The profound destiny, catalyst, keeper and king, her male progeny, the sons of Lilane.
When I met Gregorio's wraith, I willed myself to see her aura, wanted to see it, begged deity to make her mine. How deep my jealousy was when that was the very instant when her aura revealed itself to Gregorio. I do not think a day has passed since my seclusion, when I have not thanked deity for disappointing me on the eve of my birthday, for making me wait. Lazarus Ezekiel Zakarian, Capitulo 88.
Throughout the evening, Wraith sensed undercurrents in the conversation around her. Everyone was suddenly treating them as if she and Gregorio were a couple. After the meal, they all went to a beautiful parlor with many small seating arrangements. Gregorio led her to an elegantly upholstered love seat and sat next to her, one arm around her shoulders, pulling her close to his side.
Will you pardon our rudeness, Wraith, if I speak briefly with my son in our native language?
Theo asked after sitting down across from them.
No, that's fine,
she said with a smile. She sipped the exquisite wine she had been presented with. When she first moved to Barcelona, Gregorio had asked her if she would master the language of Hath, as they were just beginning the negotiations for the transaction that they successfully concluded before coming to Estolia. The language seemed to her as if it was what you would get if you combined Gaelic and Arabic. Once she heard Gregorio speaking with some of the stable hands in Estolian, she yearned for the time she could focus on learning his language. Harty was, however, every bit as challenging and intricate as she sensed Estolian would be. She could not master both languages at the same time, and he wanted her to learn Harty. She had begun to pick up some of the most common phrases in Estolian in the 2 weeks she'd been in the country, but she was putting off serious study until they were settled into a routine. While the two men talked, Gregorio pulled her against his side in the same way he had been doing all evening. His hand on her shoulder was distracting, especially when his thumb frequently brushed against her exposed skin. She relaxed against him, enjoying the fantasy that his hold was a sign that he was coming to care for her romantically.
With three sons prophesied, Lilane felt deprived. She wanted her daughter, felt selfish to want her. A sacred
I have asked Cassie to play a few songs. Ask Wraith to dance,
his father said. Gregorio glanced at the woman who was snuggled against his side as if they really were a couple. He hugged her closer to him, enjoying the freedom to hold her. Feeling with each supercharged nerve ending the ambience of her aura, the sure sense of home his soul was already anticipating.
She is like a firefly,
he said, amazed.
How is it I did not notice before now?
Deity knows you, knows your needs, gave you the signal you needed when you needed it.
Gregorio looked again at Wraith. The glow of her aura was still visible, still beckoning every cell in his body to give his soul into her keeping. Her green eyes met his, and he saw her beauty within them. He was not sure what would happen this evening, but he was sure this woman was the only one he would ever love.
It is not certain Zeke will find his Kaylee in time. You will take his place as keeper if he cannot.
Theo's voice was solemn.
From the blessing he received when he became the last resort, It is clear there will be some obstacle, beyond breaking his leg, that will stand in his way. Hopefully, he will be successful. It could be almost a year before we will know.
Have you shared with him these insights?
He asked his father. He had to struggle to focus on the topic of Zeke rather than Wraith. He felt like a moth drawn irresistibly to the flame of her aura. Perhaps there was an analogy between the two situations. Just as a moth was given the genetic imperative to seek the flame, so too were the sons of Zacharias drawn to the pureness of the aura of the woman destined to be their Kaylee, the keeper of their soul. Gregorio had to drag his attention back to the topic at hand and focus on his father's words.
I will have a discussion with Zeke tomorrow.
His father said,
Once you have married, I would like you to immediately take on the elder year. During that time you will receive the necessary training, so if it is required of you to do so, you will be able to take Zeke's place.
Gregorio frowned.
I thought I was to take over the stable.
Sebastian and Melanie are not quite ready to hang up their stirrups. Assuming everything works out for Zeke, you will be Sebastian's assistant and take over from him gradually over the next 5 years. For the sake of Estolia, it is critical you receive the training.
He smiled slowly before saying,
I am comforted, Gregorio, by the sure knowledge that you could take on Zeke's role with alacrity, and you would fill the position well. Estolia has never been without someone to keep her soul, and I know you will do the job well, if deity asks you to.
A sacred prophecy was like no others, about 3 brothers, the sons of Lily.
I am going to play a few Estolian songs,
Cassie announced to the room in general. Her grin was mischievous. Lillian crossed the room to pick up a violin stored on a shelf next to the grand piano. When they began to play, Wraith was lost in wonder at the beauty of the music, especially when Cassie started to sing in her pure soprano.
Excuse me,
Theo said.
I'm going to go dance with the love of my life.
By the end of the song, several couples were on the dance floor. When the second song began, Gregorio got to his feet and bowed to Wraith.
Would you do me the honor of dancing with me, Wraith?
He asked. Wraith stood and was grateful for Gregorio's hand steadying her.
I think, Gregorio, that I've had more wine than I should have.
He put one arm around her waist as he guided her to the dance floor.
I should have warned you that Estolian wine is quite potent.
He pulled her close to his body and started to dance with her to the tune of the beautiful lilting melody Cassie was playing on the piano. They danced for some time in silence. She enjoyed feeling Gregorio's solid physique holding her and guiding her with ease. She leaned her cheek against his chest and closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat and dreaming they were a couple, that he loved her as much as she loved him. Love. She was in love with Gregorio Zakarian. Her nights were spiced with dreams of his body joined with hers, as part of the natural sharing that went with marriage. She wanted to belong to him exclusively, and have him belong to her. She could think of nothing more fundamentally perfect than to have his body wedded, welded, melded to hers. By the third song, she was wishing the night would never end.
Your family is incredibly kind. They are almost too good to be true.
He laughed softly in response.
They are as human as anyone,
he said,
with all of the usual faults of character. But we do, as a people, tend to wear our faults as one wears undergarments, hidden from the world, while we wear our virtues as one wears a hat or a coat, the first piece of apparel others view.
What faults?
She had seen Gregorio justifiably angry when a new hire was discovered being cruel to the horses. She had also seen him focus with single-minded intensity on tasks, to the exclusion of all else. He did not seem to have any major character flaws.
You have many times had to remind me to turn my attention from whatever I was doing to more mundane tasks. I have more than once snapped at you.
He reminded her.
I have also chosen a pathway I knew would cause my father and mother distress.
Wraith felt a wrench of fear. Her acceptance of her own feelings, the wonderland of being in love, regardless of whether or not it was reciprocated, was so new, she did not want to suddenly discover her feelings were always impossible. What if the distress his family felt was over a preference for his own gender? She needed the hope of knowing he was, at the very least, attracted to women. She thought back to his interactions with both men and women over the last 8 months but could recall no sign of his showing an interest in either. Her curiosity was piqued.
What do you mean?
She asked. She did not realize they were stopped in the middle of the dance floor or that her face communicated the way she feared his answer. He reached up and brushed her hair behind her ears, his thumb caressing the jut of her cheekbone before falling away, as if reluctant to stop touching her.
It is a natural part of my religion for men to marry as soon after their 30th birthday as possible. At the age of 18, I told my father I would not indulge in any sort of intimacy with a woman, unless I was certain she was the right woman for me. He told me I was closing my mind to many possibilities.
His arm slipped back around her waist and they began dancing again. Wraith tried to understand what he told her. When they first met, he said he was utterly celibate. There were nuances in what he was saying, but they were eluding her. As they swept around the room, his body heat warming her, his thighs against hers, she felt one golden truth over all her doubts. Like baker's sugar sifted onto a cake, he spoke only of loving women. She had a chance after all. When the music ended, Isaiah crossed the room to sit next to Lillian at the piano. Together they played a duet, singing a song that was extraordinarily moving, even if Wraith did not understand the words.
This song,
Gregorio whispered in her ear,
was put to music after Lillian married Isaiah. It is an old poem written by one of our ancestors. It speaks of the incredible connection my ancestor created with his wife, how he could feel his soul rest within her keeping, and knew there would never be another woman that would interest him for the entirety of his life.
When the duet ended, Wraith felt a wrench of disappointment. The festivities were due to Gregorio's return to his homeland, and his cousin's return from the hospital. After this evening it would be business as usual.
I will walk with you back to your room,
Gregorio told her. They said good night to the others, and then Gregorio put an arm around her waist so he could guide her back to the part of the palace that housed her room.
To keep the promise to deity. Oh, the promise to deity.
Magical melding, the promises were kept. Two souls welding, together they accept. When glorious truth settled into their souls, there's nothing to lose in accepting their roles.
Deity gives every Estolian the exact trials and tribulations that they need to refine the purity of their soul and bring them the greatest blessings in their time. Ninth postulate of inner peace. K. Darrow.
While they walked, he pointed out several items of interest, telling her some of the history of the building. When they got to her room, he escorted her inside.
Thank you, Gregorio,
she said softly. His expression was serious. He brushed her hair back away from her face, his hand warm against her skin.
He
began, breaking off as if he did not know what he really wanted to say. He stepped closer to her, his hand sliding into her hair.
Wraith.
He whispered her name. The feel of his lips on hers kick-started her heart. She had dreamed of him one day coming to care for her, but for so long she had been telling herself to forget the fantasy. She could not believe it was coming true. When he pulled back slightly, she asked,
Gregorio?
No other woman has ever incited my imagination, Wraith,
he said, his voice barely above a whisper.
I could not imagine what it was like to wish to lose one's soul before this day.
The feel of his warm body against her own, his large hands cupping the back of her head, the electric thrill of reaction between his skin and hers all contributed to a sense of timelessness. He pulled her closer still and his lips were on hers again, his tongue brushing her bottom lip until her lips parted. The feel of his arousal pressed against her finally penetrated the haze of desire rushing through her body. She pulled back slightly and saw they had somehow gone from the door to the side of her bed. In addition, she had a vague memory of unbuttoning his shirt and caressing his chest. She had to fight against her desire to experience everything there was to know about this man.
Gregorio,
she said again.
Wraith,
He said.
I cannot just say goodnight and leave you.
His hands dropped a little lower than her waist, instead spanning her hips, pulling them tight against his. She did not want him to go. With his shirt open in front of her, she pushed the fabric aside and leaned towards him, kissing his chest, tasting his skin, smelling his personal scent. Her attention was so centered on getting to know his body and taste, she did not notice when he unzipped her dress. It was only as it slithered off her body, leaving her standing in only her camisole top and matching undergarments, that she realized what was happening. She looked up at him and saw the glaze of desire on his face.
I must.
He broke off, looking down at her with a strange expression. He looked almost tortured as his eyes met hers and his hand came up to cup one breast through the fabric of her camisole. She knew she should stop this. He had declared his intention to only be intimate with his wife. A part of her felt like she was going to force his hand if she allowed him to continue. She pushed his shirt off his shoulders and felt it fall on her feet.
Wraith,
he whispered again.
You are so beautiful.
She lifted her face to him and was rewarded when his lips covered hers. Desire rippled through her body. When they came up for air, he was pulling her camisole off her upper body, and she was unbuckling his belt. She pushed his pants down over his hips, and he bent towards her, cupping one breast, while he teased the other with his mouth. She gripped his shoulders hard in response to the way he was inflaming her senses. She felt as if there was some power she possessed that she had never accessed before. He had declared his purity to be as important to him as hers was to her, but the desire to experience all that he was more important to her, mattered more to her than any arbitrary vow of celibacy either may have made. He ran his hands over her naked back, following the curve of her spine until he reached the silk and lace of her undergarments. She mimicked his actions, running her hands over his shoulders, back, spine, until she was disappointed by the feel of fabric in the way of her exploration. She pushed her hands beneath them. It was not long before the heat at her core demanded the only way to appease her need was by removing the last of their clothing. She pushed his briefs down his legs, feeling the rough hair of his thighs. He pulled her back to her feet and then pushed her undergarments off with more haste. She stepped out of the scrap of lace, and looked at him, seeing the entire man, the proud jut of his erection and the sensuality in every line of his body. Her breathing came in shallow, short gasps as she anticipated his possession. She backed up to the bed behind her and turned away from him to push the covers back. When she straightened up, he was just behind her. His hands came around her, holding her breasts, rubbing over the rigid tips, his hips pressing against her, as his mouth nibbled on her ear. She tilted her head back, feeling the overpowering rush of sensation sparking each nerve ending into quivering life. She turned around and looked at him. Her eyes met his as she reached for and touched the rigidity of his arousal, caressing him, accepting and wanting the merging of flesh. He kissed her again. They moved as one onto the bed. When he pushed one of his legs between hers, she realized that she had to be certain he wanted this as much as she did.
Gregorio?
She extended the syllables of his name, wanting to caress every part of his body with the same passion as she said his name.
I want you to make love to me. Possess me. But only if this is what you really want.
He cupped her intimately and only iron willpower enabled her to finish speaking.
Wraith,
he said, opening his eyes to look down at her. She could see he was as sharp as ever, and he was definitive when he said to her,
this is what I want, to possess and be possessed equally.
He slid both legs between hers, his body pressing up against her as he kissed her again. He pulled his head back slightly so he could look into her eyes while their bodies merged. She wanted this man to love her, even as he possessed her, filling her heart, soul, and body with all he had to give her. She felt the strength of their union, enjoying and reveling in the sense of his body within her own, bringing her to a feeling of pleasure and joy beyond anything she ever imagined was possible. She did not know if their mutual dance lasted minutes or hours, but when pleasure rolled in waves of warmth through them both, he gasped her name. She felt as if every beat of his heart was a pulse within her own body.
Gregorio.
To Wraith, his name felt like the sound of water rushing over the pebbles in a stream.
Wraith.
He looked at her and kissed her again before reluctantly moving away from her. She felt a sense of loss when his body slipped from hers. He then gathered her close, pulling the covers over them. He was crying. She felt tearful, but for her, it was the unspeakable joy of their connection that made her want to cry. She hoped his tears were not for the loss of virtue. She knew with a sure sense that, even if this was the only time she would ever know this man in this way, she could not regret the mind-blowing experience they had just shared. But she hoped with every part of her body that she would not be deprived of knowing this again.
That was,
he said softly, his arms crushing her to him.
the most incredible experience of my life, Wraith.
He kissed her again.
The memory will always be exquisite.
He took a deep breath.
I'm not sure we can't surpass it,
she said, hoping to hear he wanted more than the one experience. He pulled back slightly and grinned down at her.
I think, Wraith, you have just issued me a challenge I cannot ignore. We should make plans to practice until we can surpass this experience. I know I will never be able to touch another woman in my life.
His eyes met hers steadily when he asked,
Make your life with me, Wraith. Promise to be with me forever.
She did not wish to be apart from this man.
You mean...
Knit your life permanently to mine. Marry me. Keep my soul safe. Have our children.
She touched his face, running her fingertips over the planes and curves.
Do you mean it?
Oh yes, Wraith, I would not survive if you left me now.
Gregorio, I want to be with you, be yours, have you be mine for life and on into eternity if we can swing it.
My father knew you were the right one for me,
he said.
He might pop in here.
Tonight?
She asked, feeling her face flood with color.
An Estolian tradition peculiar, I know.
He kissed her briefly before climbing out of the bed. Smiling at her, he moved to a chest at the foot of her bed. Opening it, he pulled out a robe and shrugged into it, before handing her a nightgown. She put the garment on, and then looked at the untidy scattering of clothing and shoes. He helped her pick up the scattered apparel. After everything was tidy, he pulled her back into his arms, kissing her, pulling her body tight up against his. They were so involved with one another it was almost a shock when the sound of a throat being cleared intruded on their solitude. She pulled away from Gregorio and looked towards the door, blushing when 3 men entered the room, the king, the former king, and Gregorio's father. Gregorio grinned at the 3 men, pulling her up against his body, both of his hands settling onto her abdomen.
Gregorio,
Theo said,
as the firstborn son of the keeper, do you have anything to say?
I, Gregorio Mortimer Zakarian, have given my soul into the keeping of Wraith Michelle Verone.
Theo nodded and turned his attention to Wraith. He was projecting 2 disparate emotions, cold, implacable duty, and warm approval. She waited to hear what he had to say.
Wraith Michelle Verone, did you willingly take my son's soul into your keeping?
He asked her. Guessing they meant something to do with either taking his virginity or his taking hers, she nodded.
I did.
Will you keep his soul safe the entirety of your life?
He asked. She looked up at Gregorio, feeling a sense of both adventure and homecoming.
Gregorio's soul will be safe with me, always.
Hesitation, indecision, brought doubts and unease. Unable to see, to envision the aura his soul it sees. One glorious truth settled into their souls. There's nothing to lose.